Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 42, which will obviously contain the answers to life, the universe, and everything. Definitely, yes. Well, come on, how could I not have episode 42 and not make a really cheap Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference? Anyway, so I've kind of, as I sometimes do, picked out a theme for this one, and the theme is going to be premiums, and if you're thinking that might have something to do with all of the recent brouhaha, then you would be entirely correct. Now I've got a pair of tanks games and a Warships game for you. They all feature premiums, and they're all very different types of premiums. And we're actually going to kick off with this game from Seralis in the Pz.II. And I don't really need to tell you how this is going to go. In fact, I almost don't really need to tell you what kind of premium that I'm trying to represent here, because this is one of the oldest, most blatantly OP premiums in the game. So the 2J, for those like 3 people who are maybe unaware, is a tier 3 premium tank. It is quite rare because it's also quite expensive, and for a long time the only way you could get this was with a super hard to get boxed kind of special edition of World of Tanks, which came with either a code for this or the BTSV, and there might have been a third tank, but I think it was just those two. Now the BTSV itself was maybe a bit more overpowered once upon a time, in that it sort of suffered a bit more from power creep, because it has relatively thin armour, but it's also very angled armour. Whereas this, well, it's just about that raw armour value, and even though there are certainly more tanks around these days that can pen that armour, it's still incredibly tough, and it is still one of the most just blatantly, unrepentantly OP tanks in the game. And it's only really its rarity that kind of makes it semi-okay. I mean, having said it's rare, it doesn't really kind of detract from the fact that it is what it is, and it always has been. And so, you know, it was entirely a deliberate decision on Wargaming's part to make it that way. Now, the balance, if I can use that word for that, is that the gun is incredibly weak. It's basically got a tier 1 gun at tier 3, and it can see tier 4s. So if you don't get top tier matchmaking, and there's things like Matildas and Valentines and B1s and B2s and anything with even a modicum of armour, you're basically stuffed, even if you, as Seralis is doing, as I think most people who have this thing do, fire full premium, because even with the full premium rounds, it's still got a bad gun for its tier. But it's good enough to deal with most of the things it will meet when it's top tier. So this is, you know, it's kind of like some of the other premiums that we have in the game, where they have good armour but weak guns, and that even goes for some of the older premiums like the IS-6. It's not just stuff like the Chrysler K. So, is the Pz.II okay? No, not really. It's only its rarity that stops it from being more of a problem, and the fact that I think it's a tier 3 more than anything else, because whilst you could just pad your win rate like crazy with this thing, playing nothing but tier 3 over and over and over and over, and just seal clubbing over and over, would be tremendously boring for the vast majority of people. I've got one of these myself. I was actually gifted it by a very generous viewer, and someone who actually was a friend of Jingles, as an odd little real life connection. And it's the kind of tank that you take out after having a really frustrating day with teams or whatever, and you just want to kick some puppies, because that's what this thing does. But if all you ever did was kick puppies with this thing, that would be a really boring way to play World of Tanks. So it's not okay balance-wise, as it were, but I think its positioning in the tech tree makes it a bit better than, say, some of the tier 8s, but then it's also a lot more expensive than most of those tier 8s for all intents and purposes, because those rare occasions when it is on sale are generally in with an awful lot of gold. And I think the particular occasion when this was gifted to me, it was something like €100. So this is like you know, the first type, as it were. And we've had tanks like this in World of Tanks for a long time, and there's even another low tier tank which you probably have never heard of called the MTLS, and I think the only way to play it for a long time was with a press account that had everything unlocked. I don't even know if it's still in the client anymore, but that is a low tier premium, I think again tier 3, with a fairly terrible gun, but it had 2 guns in its turret and you could fire both at the same time, and the fact that you could just do that much damage at once was what made it kind of crazy OP. And that one's never been on sale, so there's always been this weird kind of thing where Wargaming does occasionally put in these really imbalanced tanks, even before the recent trend, but they've held back on other machines. And we've also had cases like the Su-76I, where it was put out and then pulled from sale, or the E25 where it was pulled from sale, except with E25 of course we have then subsequently, I believe, had it on sale since. So, you know, Wargaming has this need to make money. I addressed this in yesterday's video. Wargaming making money is the reason why there is a World of Tanks to begin with. And I think for most people that play the game, you know, if Wargaming suddenly announced that that it was just going away entirely, then they'd probably be a bit disappointed by that for the most part. But there's a real inconsistency with how Wargaming has done things over the years, and it's now I think that's the point, that even though we've had overpowered premiums in the past, you can see them as more isolated cases, and then it's now that we're getting to the point where we get premiums that are overpowered in some way, or imbalanced. Maybe imbalanced is the more kind of judicious word to use here. Imbalanced in some way. And that's now the trend. There are still premiums that are coming out that you could say are relatively balanced, but we've had just this progressive number of ones that definitely aren't. However, this is our second example of a premium, and this time it's one that I think is relatively balanced. In fact, it's one that was a little weak, that actually got buffed to be a nicer machine. It is the M4A1 Revalorise, being driven here by Island Man, and this is a slightly older game, hence the Jimbos and hence the mods. I think this was 914, so this might have been before the gun depression buff. I can't remember if they had other buffs to it, but you know, overall this is an example, I feel, of a reasonably balanced tank. You've got sufficient penetration for a medium, you've got terrible armor, but the offset for that is that you have a big punch for being a tier 8 medium. You've got that 105mm gun, so you know, there are strengths and weaknesses. It all becomes this relatively balanced thing. And I actually saw someone making an interesting point, specifically as regards premium ammo, which is a bit of a sidestep from what I've been saying already, but that with armoured premiums and armoured machines generally, you know, machines that don't have those qualities can always press the 2 key and negate that armour. But the converse, or the inverse of that, is that those armoured slow machines don't have anything they can reach for to suddenly negate the speed and mobility of those fast medium tanks. And it's something that, you know, balancing a game like this generally is hard, because it has a lot of vehicles in it, it has a lot of game systems in it, and I don't think any of us should pretend that this is some easy thing, that, oh, they just have to do this one thing and hey presto, the game will be magically 100% balanced and there'll never be any problems again. Now, balancing is always an ongoing thing, but with World of Tanks it might almost be a bit easier at this point, in that now we've had the Swedes in, you know, we might get some new lines in future. I do wonder if they might revisit the idea of a European tech tree, for instance. But once you know, you're in a stage where you're not adding that many new vehicles, it then becomes easier to kind of fit everything in its place, if that makes any sense. So in principle, it might be a bit easier, but also there's the fact that there's just the sheer number of tanks that are in game now that will make life a bit harder. So yeah, I don't want to, I'm not trying to proclaim myself as an authority or anything. There are a lot of people that are going to be talking about this. This is one thing that everything that happened with Foch has really brought into high visibility, and it's a conversation of many parts, if that makes any sense. So I could maybe also, that there is one other thing that's happened very recently, which I could mention here in this context, and it kind of ties into me mentioning premium ammo generally. Oh, that was just unlucky. In that Blitz has had a recent update where they actually have, with premium ammo, reduced penetration, or not reduced penetration, they've reduced the damage. So your premium ammo is now higher pen but lower damage, and alongside that they've actually reduced the cost, the credit cost of premium ammo as well, because it's less of a credit thing. And I think they've also just generally had a rebalance of the penetration of high tier, like things like high tier mediums in general. The flip side of that, of course, is there's also an incredibly controversial part of that update where the equipment system was entirely reworked and not in a good way. So a lot of people, happy about the premium ammo thing, but a lot less happy suddenly about the equipment change, and feeling like Wargaming's basically screwing them out of a lot of time and credits invested. So this match, I should probably maybe talk a little about this match in particular, because we've got Warships to come, and the final example of a premium, and I'll maybe talk about some Warships specific problems as well. So it might be worth sticking around even if you don't usually do so for Warship stuff. But yeah, as you can see, it's come down to just a few tanks. So although Iron Man's got a lot of health left, he doesn't have any armour, as I've said. It's a Sherman hull at tier 8. So he's got to be cautious, but he's maybe been a bit too cautious, and he I think got a bit hung up on the idea that the IS-3 was still around where he was last spotted, and so by the time the IS-3 did get spotted, it was a bit too late to go and help that remaining lurver. So that was, like, he made a call, he made a judgment call, he made a guess as to what the IS-3 would have done, and unfortunately got it wrong, and it was more unfortunate for the lurver than anything else, but it now makes their task that little bit harder. However, he did get the drop on that Walker Bulldog, so that's going to make life slightly easier for them. So there's a couple of enemy tanks left. The enemy arty in particular, if that catches him, bear in mind this is pre-918 arty, so that could be very nasty. This thing, as with the CDC, the French tier 8 medium, it can absolutely just get one-shotted by higher tier artillery. So he's got to be cautious here, and if he can spot for his own artillery to hit things and reset, that'll be all well and good. And if he can get damage in himself, that'll be even better. Now, this is one of the offsets of having a big gun on a medium tank, is it's actually got quite a long reload time, but he was able to safely sit there and reload and get the reset on the T-150. So the time pressure is taken off a little bit, and they know where all these remaining tanks are, barring the artillery. So that T-28 is the thing with the biggest gun, but having said what I said about, artillery can hit things, squashy French tanks for all their hit points, artillery could once upon a time hit heavily armoured tank destroyers for all their hit points, and that was obviously a top armour HE shell penetration from their own GW Tiger P, because as we saw, that T-28 was almost full health. So this is why, in a nutshell, I definitely prefer New Arty. New Arty would have hit that guy for a couple of hundred hit points, stunned him, and maybe knocked out a module or something, but you basically cannot have that kind of a one-shot anymore. It is impossible. So we've got the low health IS-3, who personally I would have loaded HE for, but it's not got the fastest reload, this gun. So he's got APCR, which is the standard on this, and he's going to follow that up with a heat shell if need be, I think, just to ensure the extra penetration. But no, with the 105 HE, I think the IS-3, like, unless he hit the end of his gun barrel or something, he'd maybe have a pretty good chance of actually taking him out. But despite having a look for the IS-3, I mean, he could well afford to trade hit points to kill the IS-3, which would be a good thing to do at this stage. That IS-3 is nowhere to be found. So it looks like the T-150 is still in the cap, and if they can take him out, well, that will make things a lot easier. So just under 4 minutes on the cap. It's actually the GW Tiger P that got that very low health T-150, which would have been more than possible with new arty as well, of course. I already did a video where I showed a bit of an edge case, somebody getting 7 rather low health kills with artillery, but yeah, towards the latter stages of the game, when you've got lots of low health tanks running around, artillery actually gets more powerful these days. Now, I think Isle of Man was initially thinking he'd go hunting the IS-3, maybe hunting the artillery. There's still 3 minutes left after all, but the T-28 and actually I didn't catch who it was that counselled it, but somebody was counselling them capping, which between the two of them they can do in time, provided they don't get reset, provided the IS-3 doesn't spot them for artillery. So we knocked over a wall getting here, but there's no blind fire incoming, which is interesting, and there's no sign of that IS-3, who of course is low health, but could still make this a real problem for them. Now, I've sped this up so you don't have to sit through the whole capping process in real time, but well, if those remaining enemies want to do something, they've only got a couple of seconds left to do it. So 3, 2, 1, and they've capped. And it's just as they cap that the IS-3 then pops over, gets spotted and tries to spot them, but it's all far too late. So that was the safe but somewhat boring end to that, but sometimes that's what you want to do. You want to get the safe but boring option and actually win. And having said safe but boring, it's still a bit risky. If they'd been reset and unable to kill the remaining 2 enemies, that could have been a very frustrating draw. But as it was, well, as you can see, that was a nice ace tanker with a clutch of medals for Island Man there, and a pretty good amount of damage done. So you can do well in a premium like this. And as you can see, he made a very healthy profit. And this was even after firing, I think, 1 or 2 rounds of heat ammo. But it's a tank with its drawbacks and limitations, and it has those in a balanced way, crucially, as opposed to the 2J or the Chrysler K. So lastly, we come to World of Warships and Darnith in the Missouri. Now, hopefully you have stuck around, even if you don't normally, because the Missouri is something a bit unique in that it's the first of its kind in Warships, and it's the first of its kind across either game. It's a Tier 9 premium tank, and it's special in that it is a premium that you don't buy with money directly. You buy it with free experience. You need 750,000 free experience to buy this from the tech tree. Now, what it is basically an Iowa, which is the regular Tier 9 US battleship, but it has radar. So it is a bit different in that regard as well, but in most ways it's basically it's kind of like one of the Berlin tanks in World of Tanks. It's a premium version of an existing vehicle, and it does have that difference of the radar. Now, as a Tier 9, it absolutely makes so much money. It makes so many credits. This is by far the #1 best credit making premium in World of Warships, and it takes a bit of an investment of time more than anything else to get there, because even if you're intending to get one of these, you still need to have the XP from somewhere, and if you're really patient you can just grind out the free XP. But if you're impatient, which is what Wargaming is counting on, you can convert the XP from other ships with doubloons, and that's the point where you're actually then starting to pay real money. And if you're converting that much XP with doubloons, well, it's not especially cheap. But you can, of course, at any point, you know, you've got the option of doing half and half. Half and half? I came over all cockney there. Half and half. You can grind part of the way with the free XP and then buy the rest of the XP required. So it has no special qualities compared to regular tech tree ships, but it makes far more credits, and it has radar as a battleship, which actually, having said no special qualities, that kind of is a special quality. I've immediately contradicted myself there. So that gives it a slightly different playstyle than the regular Iowa. It's a bit more useful for pushing cap circles, for instance, with the radar, but in all other regards it's got the same playstyle, essentially. You don't want to go around sailing broadside in this thing at the moment because you will get deleted rather quickly. So this fits in as an interesting kind of, you know, because we've had premiums like this in World of Tanks as well, premium versions of regular tanks. And it's interesting that Wargaming did the Berlin tanks, and then we haven't really seen many like that since. And they kind of almost went a different route and introduced different skinned versions of existing premium tanks, and that in of itself was somewhat controversial. Personally, I didn't really have that big of an issue with it, because if there was a particular premium that you really liked, well, guess what, now you can buy 2 of them. But I think some people maybe would prefer to be able to have premium versions of existing things. And there's at least one other game, and I can't remember what it is, but maybe I'm even thinking of War Thunder, where you can buy like various things that you can do with your regular vehicles. But you know, one of the things Wargaming could potentially do, and I'm sure they've considered this as an option, but I don't know if they've even gotten as far as ever like testing it, but is to buy a thing with real money for a regular ship that then increases the you know, like effectively turns it into a premium. And you can sort of do that with spending real money on the premium camos for regular ships, and I honestly think those are rather too expensive, to be honest. As a personal opinion, I've only bought a couple of them myself, but those don't give you increased income. I might be like, there might be 1 or 2 maybe that do. I haven't looked at every single premium camo for a regular ship, but I don't think there are any that give you an increased income. But the higher tier ones especially give you decreased running costs, so you can effectively still make more money from the ship. So as an investment for a ship that you like, that you play a lot, you know, a premium camo could well be worth it. But the biggest benefit overall is still that, and this, by the way, is why you don't sail broadside in an Iowa. Hello, enemy Iowa. Yes, that's a lot of lovely citadels you've got there. Yep. Yep, that happened. That's not going to be a thing in the next patch, by the way, with the warships. They're actually going to lower the citadels to make Iowas a little less vulnerable to that. But anyway, back to what I was saying. So, yeah, the main benefit of premium camos is it gives extra XP on the ship. And that's great when you're grinding, but once you've actually elited the ship, unlocked the next ship, then at that point it's far less useful. And it maybe is the reduction in running costs that becomes the thing that is kind of handy. So, you know, there are a lot of different ways you can monetize a game like Tanks and Warships. And honestly, I mean, I've talked about problems with the games, so maybe I should talk about the issues with Warships particularly. And probably the biggest issue overall, it's not OP premiums. There have been some. The Belfast is known for being very strong, but it's actually the reward ships, the campaign rewards, that are the most problematic in terms of balance. First, the USS Flint, which was an Atlanta with the ability to use a smokescreen and... is it radar? I think it can use a radar, yes. So it can sit in radar and smoke, which is what the yes, sit in smoke and radar is what I mean, which is what the Belfast can do as well. But the Belfast doesn't get some things that some of the regular British cruisers do. And then there's the USS Black, which is worse, definitely worse, because it is a destroyer a stealthy destroyer, one of the best destroyers in the game. It's the US Tier 9 Fletcher class destroyer. With radar, it can stealth radar. It is incredibly powerful. You get one of these things into a cap circle in the early game, and you can just, like, you can take an enemy team out at the knees almost by removing their eyes. You can take, like, if the majority of the enemy destroyers go to a single cap point, which is probably sometimes, you know, sometimes it's desirable, but sometimes it can turn out to be a bad plan. But if there's a black on the enemy team, then suddenly none of the destroyers want to contest the cap points, because they know the black's just going to sit there and radar them, and can do so from smoke, and in some cases can even do so without being detected by the destroyer, because they have worse concealment to begin with. So the reward ships are probably the biggest vehicle balance problem we have at the moment, and they count as premiums in that you get bonus credits and XP from playing them, and you can use your other ship captains with them. Can't figure out if this Moskva was trying to ram or not, by the way. It kind of looked like he was, and then he doesn't really steer towards Darnith, so I don't know. In fact, Darnith was almost more at risk from friendly torpedoes there. Anyway, so he came through that rather nicely, and was getting some nice citadels there as well. That was actually some quite good aiming on his part. So, yeah, so the fact that, okay, you don't buy these ships directly maybe changes the complexion of things a bit, but it remains that they are unbalanced. They are grossly unbalanced in the case of the black, and you know, the fact that you need to beat campaigns to get them. Okay, you can see an argument for it's a really good reward for players, but that doesn't change change the fact that it's unbalanced. It doesn't change the ship. So, you know, Warships has its own issues, and there's another thing. There was actually a post on Reddit today by a fairly active Warships subreddit poster called Mr. Fingers, and this doesn't even really have to do with game balance. You know, we had all the stuff with the Foshgates and you know, was it NA that put out the statement and blah blah blah, but as it turned out, actually it was the wargaming headquarters in Cyprus that originated the statement, and it happened to be NA that then gave it out to Kotaku and Jim Sterling, due to the fact that he's based in the US, and, you know, I'm sure there were time zones involved. So to get back on point, yeah, he's basically compiled a list of the specials, some of the special events that we've had on World of Warships on the different server regions, and quite notably, EU gets shafted a lot. And I mean, like, a lot. There is a serious, considerable disparity. So this isn't even an in-game balance thing. This is how Wargaming is treating different server regions thing. And it's at the point where it's incredibly noticeable and not really defensible. You know, for Warships, EU is the biggest server cluster, and so maybe they have more incentive to be more generous on other servers because they want to get the numbers in. But then that ends up just completely shafting the EU player base, because other servers get missions and things that are easier with better rewards, whereas EU gets these incredibly grindy missions with rewards that make it seem barely worth it. So anyway, we'll probably cover some of this stuff more in detail on, you know, later videos, but I thought this would be a good showcase with the different premiums to talk about it, and hopefully my Patreons don't mind too much, because these were all in their own way fairly good games, although I'd say, you know, the 2J game, it was a Pz.II game, so it was basically what you'd expect. But yeah, Island Man had a very good game in the M4A1, and as you can see, Darnith had a very good game in the Missouri, and if the enemy team had a bit more time to turn that around, they might have, but his team had the cap circle advantage for long enough that they had a significant points lead. So even though it came down to being very tight on actual ship numbers, they were so far ahead at that point that the victory was guaranteed unless the enemy team had then managed to sink them all, which they were not in a position to do. So yeah, over 2,000 base XP, 172,000 570 damage and 2 kills, and that Iowa deletion was just, oh, that's the stuff that, you know, battleship captains in particular, you know, they dream of and maybe occasionally have nightmares about, but it's more that cruiser captains have nightmares about that stuff. Just getting instantly citadel deleted from quite a lot of hit points. Yeah, it's a less fun part of cruiser gameplay, but unfortunately it's a thing you have to live with to some extent. So that's it for this Patreon supporter spotlight. Hopefully you have found it interesting and entertaining and enjoyed the gameplay. And if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.